Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're located in the world. That might be a different greeting for you. Welcome to our Education and Generative AI Roundup. This is now our third roundup that we're doing after a third workshop. So as you're filing in, number one, hi, it's so great to see some of you again. Well, virtually. And if you would, in the chat, introduce yourself, your name, your role, your institution, and then optionally, if you want to share one way you've used generative AI in your course this fall, and if you're maybe Reed Malone and at Packback, maybe one way you're using generative AI professionally this fall. Hey, Reed, good to see you. So if you're new to this webinar series, hello, great to have you. This webinar is brought to you by Packback and the League for Innovation in the Community College. And just want to say a huge thank you to the League for your partnership. And Cynthia, if you want to say hi to everyone.
Yeah, just hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Wilson. I'm Vice President for Learning and Chief Impact Officer at the League. And we continue to be excited about our relationship with Packback. We have a great partnership and are really pleased to be presenting these various webinars about generative AI and AI in general to everyone. We've been doing this now for months, it seems like, and we certainly plan to continue. But thanks so much, Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so some housekeeping before we get started and I get to the agenda. Webinar recording and the deck that we use today will be sent out within 2 days after the webinar wraps. And then also we send out a certificate of attendance in case that's helpful for you. Please ask your questions in the Q&A feature. You can also answer each other's questions. You can upvote. So use the Q&A feature and then use the chat for reflections, for idea sharing. We do not limit the chat, so use it appropriately, but network, meet some people. I will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A function along with a colleague of mine to make sure that if you do post a question, it gets answered either in real time or at the end of the webinar. So to get started, let's do some introductions. So my name is Kelsey Berenger. I am the Chief Executive Officer at Packback. My background is in high school teaching. I was a high school chemistry and physics teacher before joining Packback, where I was really had quite a strong desire to professionally evangelize the use of technology in classrooms to solve student outcomes. So with that, I am so delighted to be joined today by Aliana. If you are I'm going to assume everyone in this webinar listened to New York Times daily podcast episode on ChatGPT and cheating. And there was this voice I heard, and I said, I need to find this person and befriend them. And that's exactly what I did because I know no boundaries. And I found Aliana and I asked if she wanted to do thought leadership pieces together. And she very much said yes. So I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself, tell a little bit about herself. So Aliana.
So hi, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Aliana Narani. I am a third year at UCLA. Well, I'm starting my third year tomorrow. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and I'm an English major, philosophy minor. And yeah, I'm not huge on technology, but it's rising. And I started writing articles last year for a paper on campus. And I wrote an article about ChatGPT and the New York Times read it. And then I was on the podcast and now here we are.
Yeah. So well. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited because we've been featuring administrator and instructor voices for almost a year now in these webinars, but we have yet to feature a student voice. And I know maybe a little biased. I love your voice. So we're gonna feature it today and dig into the mind a little bit of the student perspective in a post-GPT world. So agenda for today. We'll talk about some generative AI and education in the news. We'll specifically talk about 3 stories, and we're going to get Aliana's perspective on it. We'll do a little bit of a Q&A just so that we can dig into the student brain and hopefully walk away feeling like a little bit more mindful as educators of what students really want and how they feel right now. And then I'm going to demo a Gen AI tool that is free. It's not a Packback tool, but I will demo a tool that everyone can have access to that I've loved so that you can leave having learned something new about AI, but then also a new AI tool. Then we'll do some closing remarks. So with that, let's hop into the news. So recently, and if you're a subscriber to the Neuron, it's a great newsletter. I was shared that BCG consultants were given 18 consulting tasks like draft a press release marketing copy for your product. Now, this was a study run by Harvard Business School, and these were the results. So when these consultants used GPT, 12% more tasks were done. They finished the tasks 25% faster, and the quality of the tasks were 40% higher. So overall, GPT-4 was helpful in completing these tasks. Now, here's some other insightful news. AI helped the worst consultants the most. So the bottom half consultants saw a 43% boost with AI compared to just 17% for the higher performers. And then it also said that AI was bad when it was relied upon too much. So the really complex tasks, when GPT-4 did so low, lower quality is what happened. So AI can only be trusted so much. So Aliana, I'm gonna open it up to you. So as a student, what's your perspective on these findings? On how it can boost performance? Do you find this concerning? Do you find it encouraging? Where are you at?
I mean, I think I don't know if there's a way to see this as concerning. I think it's great that we're becoming more productive and we're performing better. And I know we've always been told as students, oh, those AI is going to take over your job. Good luck, kids. But to me, this just tells me that, okay, as long as I stay up to date with how AI works and I know how to use it to its fullest extent, then I'll stay competitive. And there'll always be people who are going above and beyond and who will be top performers. And this just raises the bottom bar, I think.
Yeah. And there's this piece too of like a task too complex was actually made worse with AI. And I'll put you on the spot here because we didn't talk about this question, but have you run into a case of AI being used and you're like, if you would have just not used AI, it would have been better?
Yeah, I think when it becomes like a creative or a more abstract thought, for the articles, because right now I'm editing this paper at school, when people turn in things that are written by AI, I'm like, oh man, you could have said such an interesting thing if you just thought about this a little. And instead it's incoherent. I don't even know if you read it over. Like you're using turns of phrases that just don't exist. It doesn't feel like a human. So it's tough. Like writing is tough, but I think you'd be so much better off if you just did the hard work rather than like took a shortcut all the time.
Yeah. This is why I was so excited to have you on this webinar, because you sound like a professor. Is I think a lot of professors feel that it would have just been so much better if you would have done it yourself. And specifically with something like a school newspaper, people don't want to read stuff written by AI, and we're about to talk about that. But yeah, I love your perspective of I want to hear voice. It would have been better with your voice.
Yeah, I mean, I know that writing is hard, but I think in certain cases there's no shortcut, and this proves that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that you brought up was this idea of like raising the floor. So you're entering your third year at UCLA, and I won't have you identify, where you feel like you fall in kind of this like academic spectrum, but yeah, what are your just overall thoughts on the concept of how AI could raise the floor in education?
Yeah, I think I think this is more for the earlier years of college, because when you get to the more advanced years, submitting an AI paper is just not good enough. But in the earlier years, I could see how students would submit AI and get a good grade right now. But I think once it becomes accepted that people are using AI, because it raises the bar, it'll just up the standard of work for everyone. So the AI generated essay will be like a D, and everyone wants to do better than that. So they'll have to learn how to use AI to improve their work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so much fear right now in education that of this like equity concerns with AI of like what happens if a school bans it, and all the other students at schools who didn't ban it, are they at a disadvantage? Or my students who can't pay for GPT Pro, or there's just a lot of equity concerns. But what this is doing is it's shining the light on the application of AI that's doing good for equity, which is raising the floor for how can we get our maybe lowest performing students, for whatever reason, maybe it's just they need more feedback or they need more support, getting them a little bit up. So I do like this idea of AI for equity, but I think it needs to be used correctly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. I love having you. Well, let's talk about this next story, but before that, we'll launch a little poll just to get folks perspectives here. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. You should be able to see it. The first question is, do you think it's likely generative AI will raise the floor specifically in helping lower performing students close skill gaps? Which, by the way, if you're unfamiliar with PackBack, that's literally exactly what we do and what we live for, is providing instant feedback so that students feel like they have access to the ability to achieve. Second question is, who do you think will benefit more from AI assistance like GPT-4 in the future? Is it high performers, average workers, senior executives, or other? Should professionals be required to disclose when work products were generated by AI? And then the last question is, do you think college students that are taught how to use generative AI will be more career ready than their peers who are not taught how to use generative AI? So actually, as people answer this poll, Aliana, the idea of career readiness and GPT, or like figuring out how to use generative AI for career readiness, is that something that you're really learning or you're hoping to learn this upcoming school year, is how to use generative AI?
Yeah, I sincerely doubt that we will actually learn how to use AI. I think, I mean, I don't want to say education moves slowly, but I think, they tend to wait for a lot of research done. And especially because I go to a state school, the government has to okay things. So I doubt that we'll have actual learning, like workshops, which is what I think would be best. But I'm optimistic that maybe professors, when they're putting, don't use AI in their syllabi, maybe they'll talk about it a little more. That's like the most I can hope for.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad.
Yeah. So you really want to be taught how to use generative AI. And we're going to dig into a little bit more about like what makes you passionate. So I'll like pin that. But yeah, I do agree. I think like a workshop kind of consortium would be amazing. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Because we're like on the line where it's like, if you really know how to use generative AI, you're like way ahead of the game. And if you don't know how to use it, it's kind of okay. But things are changing so fast that soon it won't be okay. And
Yeah.
so that's what the concern is.
Yeah, a year from now, who knows? If you don't know how to prompt GPT, you might be irrelevant. Who knows?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's moving fast. So I went ahead and ended the poll. It's a nice, like, I would say, mixed bag of cats. And I would say some themes here is, I think majority of us think we need to be disclosing when we use generative AI professionally. And then, do you think students that are taught how to use generative AI will be more career ready? 75% said yes. So I'd actually like to hear from folks who are a little bit unsure about this impact of generative AI on career readiness. Well, let me share the results of that poll. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. And so that I'm following the rules, I want to be clear that generative AI produced these poll questions. I did not produce the poll questions. I fed this study to generative AI and I asked it to come up with poll questions for the audience. So I use specifically Claude.ai. If anybody is looking for a good tool, love Claude. So next story, which this is a really cool one, how AI increased the graduation rate at John Jay College by 32 points. So to give you some context, so in 2 years, the graduation rate at this college jumped 32 percentage points all the way up to 86%. There was AI-powered software that analyzed things like whether students' grades were slipping and whether they had signed up for courses that would give them enough credit hours to graduate. So what the software did was generated a risk score for every student that told academic advisors which students to concentrate their time on. The quote is, "The AI cannot tell us about the student experience and cannot present strategies, but that's still always going to be the role of the academic advisor." The provost, or I don't know who it was, the administrator, was clear that the predictions made by the software are a secret. We don't ever want to tell students they're at risk of not graduating. We keep that to ourselves to avoid stigmatizing students. They refer to the score from the software as a support score. So this software is basically letting academic advisors know when their students are at risk of not graduating. So, Aliana, you're entering your third year at UCLA. Like, how would you feel if you found out that your institution or your instructors were using AI for a reason to do something like decrease drop rates or increase, let's say, student grades?
I think this is amazing. Like, if they were using this would be fantastic. I like, especially like for me, my main issue would be engagement right now, just because I don't think I'm at risk of dropping out. So I think it's great for that. But for engagement, I've been on both sides of the coin where it feels like, okay, this is going really slowly and I'm bored and I'm zoning out and I don't really like, I can't focus in this class anymore. And I've also been on the, oh my gosh, everyone understands it except for me and I'm too embarrassed to like tell anyone that I need help. And so this was like more of a high school issue actually. But the fact that AI can track these things and students don't actually have to, because sometimes it's really hard to ask for help. I know we should be okay with it, but sometimes it's just, sometimes professors are intimidating or it feels like you're the only one who doesn't know what's going on. And so the fact that AI can flag this and let your like instructors and professors know, I think that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree too. And I know that there's some stigma right now about predictive analytics and that they sometimes it's just like a little bit of a gray area. It's a little bit sticky. I think what I really like about this is it's not using the AI to develop a strategy. It's still relying on the human academic advisor. So again, I'm going to throw a curveball at you that we didn't talk about earlier. So, but let's say that this AI also was then executing the strategy. Let's say the AI was able to say this student's struggling, then went ahead and took the autonomy, this little AI, to reach out to the student and start working with the student. How would you feel about that if all of a sudden AI was interacting with you because he thought that you might not graduate?
I would hate that so much. I honestly, that just like dehumanizes education. Then it feels like, okay, no one really cares about me except for like the machines. I think it's so important that it like the fact that then it's going to academic advisors and the academic advisors are the ones who talk to the students. It's also because these things, maybe they're not 100% accurate and maybe a student isn't at risk and all of a sudden they're being like told by AI, oh, you're going to drop out. That's like such a unsettling thing to hear. And instead, if it's coming from a human, then it's just like, oh, this person cares about me and my education. And I think that's so much better. I can't imagine if AI was just like reaching out to students and saying, you're at risk. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing, like there will be job automation with AI, 100%. There's going to be job automation. There are going to be roles that are affected, but then it also makes me think that, all right, maybe we're going to be able to actually invest more heavily in other areas, aka more academic advisors who are now empowered to do more. And maybe we'll see I think the average freshman retention rate across all at least the US is like 75%. Imagine if we could get that up to 90, right? And using AI and more academic advisors to do it. So I think there's this positive spin. And if you've met me, I'm optimistic. But yeah, digging into that, I want to hear a little bit more about how, like, in what sort of way would you be okay with your instructors using AI? And you'd say, big thumbs up, I have no hesitations. And in what way would you really not want your instructors using AI?
Okay, that's a good question. So for like this, the like tracking, I think that's great. Go ahead. It's not, I don't think it's that much of a privacy issue. I guess some people might say, oh, you shouldn't be using machines to collect my data. But I think this is, it's obviously like positive and it's helping people. So I'd say yes, track, as long as you get a human involved when it comes to helping come up with solutions. I also think that I don't know actually very well, but I know that there are some personalized learning apps or sites that could be used in certain classes. I know that like Duolingo, I use Duolingo in like my French class and it actually really helps. It makes things fun and I think it has a way to track what you need help on, which is perfect. And then I think one more thing that I would say, go ahead and like use it is I would use AI to like come up with exam questions and to like brainstorm lesson plans, but I would 100% look that over before you like send it out. So that's one thing I wouldn't do is write a whole exam using AI and then be like, okay, that's great. Because sometimes the questions are like indecipherable and it just makes things, students can kind of tell and then they feel like, oh, this professor really does not care at all about my education, they're using AI for everything. So I would say anything that makes it seem like detached, I wouldn't do that. But if it's making your life easier as a professor, go ahead. As long as it's not harming my education, I would say, go for it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's also interesting that you say it's like, use it to generate test questions, but then just review it and make sure it's coherent, because I think that's the exact, like, turning the mirror on the instructor. I think that's exactly what a lot of instructors want from their students is use generative AI, but don't just turn in what generative AI has to say. Review it, edit, make sure it's coherent, add your own voice, maybe add some research about, you know what I mean? Like it needs to be a tool you use for productivity. And I don't think anyone disagrees that this can be used for productivity, but make sure it doesn't remove the humanity, right? Like, think about your favorite professor. They're probably somebody who you feel actually like personally connected with, right?
100%. Yeah, all my favorite teachers and professors have been people who want to like talk through questions and like think through ideas with you, rather than they're not sending me to AI and saying, well, just put this in ChatGPT and they'll help. Like, no, I think that's where this could go really wrong, is if it's shortcuts, when really it should just be used to help. Like it's professors plus AI, not like professors replaced by AI.
Or just like no AI, period. Right?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's realistic at all.
Yeah. And I think too, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So when I taught, I got to school at usually like 5:30 a.m. so that I could get in an hour of like lesson planning and making copies. And then students would show up to my room at 7, which, by the way, I think it's like, it should be illegal for students to have to go to school before 8 a.m. But this is the webinar for that. And then I would finish my day up at about 3 and maybe do another hour. So daily I was working about like maybe, let's just say 6 to 4, right? And then I would grade on my Saturdays and I would do grad school work on my Sundays. So that idea of a 40-hour work week as a teacher was laughable. I was working 7 days a week. So I think I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If your instructor was really clear that they have a lot on their plate and they're going to be using AI in this way, but holding it accountable in this way to make their lives a little bit easier, like, do you think that'd be a compelling story? Like, I don't know, does the student realize how sometimes like overworked teachers are right now?
I always hear that teachers are overworked, but I've never heard those kinds of hours. That's insane to me. So I just believe AI, if it makes your life easier and doesn't change the product or it improves the product, go for it. But I think students would feel fine with it as long as there was a way to give feedback and there was transparency. So if it was, hey, I'm using AI to grade these types of tests, let me know if this is like reasonable for you. Then students can like submit a form and be like, yeah, this has been working, or no, I think this is a little bit off, and then you visit that later. But I think in fact it would make teachers probably give them more energy and give them more to give to their students if they had like less menial tasks to do.
Exactly. Because if you think about it too, when I was teaching, some of the best things I did were like one-on-one connections with my students, or being able to float around my classroom, listen to what they're saying, give them feedback. But it was hard to do that if I was so focused on these like 5 other things that are actually pretty like, I don't want to say trivial. They're not trivial. They're important, but they're just like tedious and they're not that hard to execute. The best thing I could think of is like giving feedback on grammar. Like I also was like a chemistry major. I was like, I can hardly spell. So like, am I the person to be giving my students feedback on grammar? So if I could find a way to utilize AI for these things that I know I have to do, I'm not passionate about, and actually doesn't require that many brain cells in the grand scheme of things, focus my time on that real teaching that, you want, I think that's where I see this being the most helpful.
Yeah, 100%. Because AI can't give like empathy, and that's what makes students feel like, oh, I actually want to be at school. People care about me here, and they care about my learning.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that.
Absolutely. Well, I just launched a poll now. Attendees, if you could open up the poll, want to just hear a little bit more about how you think AI should be used for educational outcomes. Do you think it's ethical for us to be using AI for predictive analysis? Do you think students should be notified by AI if they're at any risk, or do you think that's really just the role of the instructor or the academic advisor or the human? And then what application of AI specifically concerns you the most? Select all that apply. I think I made it one that was select all that apply. Yeah. Also, Aliana, I don't know if you saw this, but there's like, I'm seeing all these like AI chatbots that are like therapy chatbots. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this.
This is really silly, but my roommate last year used ChatGPT for like as a friend when it was like 2 in the morning, and she used to pull a lot of all-nighters. She was a bit insane, but she would she would show me in the morning the messages she was having with ChatGPT at like 4 in the morning, and it's like, ChatGPT, I'm stressed, and ChatGPT is like, here's things you can do if you're stressed, and it was the silliest thing. But I mean, if it like whatever helps. I don't think for like legitimate therapy, I think that that's something that should not be replaced by machines, but I think it is like a fun online friend. I don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it could be a buddy. I
Yeah.
have heard a lot of people using it as like a stand in something. Like I used it recently because I like couldn't decide. I couldn't make a choice between something really silly. It was like, should I extend my vacation or not? And there was like all of these different implications. And I like just asked it. I was like, hey, should I do this? And then it came back with like, hey, I think like personally, I would recommend this. Well, not personally, I can't remember how I phrased it, but I'd recommend this, and like gave me all these things to consider. Where I'm like, yeah, and we'll get to that idea of GPT as like a brainstorm buddy.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Which feels good. All right, so I'll go ahead and end this poll. I think most folks feel like AI could definitely be used for predictive analysis. I have heard, again, some pushback on this concept of that sometimes predictive analysis plants seeds of doubt in instructor heads, like, oh, this student is at risk of dropping out. The instructor will be notified, and then that instructor actually, instead of adding more support, remove support because they feel like the student's going to drop out anyway. So I know, yeah, I see your face. So there's this concept of predictive analysis can actually lead to negative implications. So I think it's really quite important for us to figure that one out. So final story we'll talk about, and I think this is the one you'll probably feel most spicy about, is this news outlet is pausing their AI experiment after botched high school sports articles, which we'll show you. But basically, there's this newspaper chain. We don't know if it's Gannett or what it is, but it's owned by SoftBank, has paused the use of this AI tool called Ledi, to write high school sports dispatches after the technology made some real big flubs. So basically, this outlet was using an AI tool to write all of the high school sports news, because basically high school sports, the schools will publish the results, and then it'll just go ahead and create news stories based off the results that are published online. And this is the example. So this was from the Columbus Dispatch. One example of something that was published, which was winning team mascot, losing team mascot, just instead of replacing it with the real thing. And then this one was hilarious, which is it was reusing the same jargon, and in this specific example, a close encounter of the athletic kind, which is hilarious and bad. And this person Googled it and found all of these articles that it was using the same phrase in, which is nutty. So they turned off this AI experiment because it was going viral in like the worst way possible. So Aliana, you're a writing major, you're an English major, you're also an editor of this paper at UCLA. So yeah, what are just your thoughts on the fact that there is a program that is literally just for AI in the news, and there are entire news outlets that are AI generated?
I think this is crazy. I just like, this is bananas to me that they would, yeah, okay, replace writers with AI, but then read it over. I think it's like well known that at this point AI is not writing perfect, like perfectly phrased articles. And the fact that like not one person in this organization looked over these articles before they got, I just can't even conceive of this. This is like a professional news source. And yeah, so if you're replacing anything with AI, you have to read it over. That seems like a given to me.
Yeah. And I don't know if you heard about this, but there was back when GPT went mainstream, there was somebody who used GPT to create a movie script. And it was like the very first scene, or it was like the very first incident in a really long scene was they all jump into a pool, and everyone who actually does script writing for a living said you could never do that, because every single time there was a take, everyone would have to dry off and rehair get their hair and makeup done, so that the last part of the scene needs to be going to the pool, or it needs to be a really short scene. It can't be beginning of a really long scene. So it's kind of like, to your point, like you can't have AI generate content without human review. It leads to this, but then also just like these things that AI wouldn't know to do.
Yeah, and like this at best is just really boring because there's no personal voice. Even if it's, even if it by fluke there's no weird close encounters of the athletic kind or like phrases like that. Even then, this is going to be mind numbing because no one has a personal like take or voice on it. That's what makes writing interesting is when people can bring themselves to it.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to ask you, because you are an English major and you are editor of your school newspaper at UCLA, or remind me what the publication is again.
It's called Her Campus. There's
Yeah.
like chapters all over the world, but I'm
Okay.
editor of the UCLA chapter.
Okay, wonderful. Her Campus. I wanted to say Her Story, and I was like, that's not it. I was like, it's wrong. But yeah, so I want to hear a little bit about how you have been using generative AI in your workflows, and then maybe how you would like to be using generative AI if you haven't started scratching the surface somewhere yet.
Yeah, I have been trying to like test it out myself because I know it's at some point we're gonna have to like it's gonna be used in everything, even though we haven't really been taught how to use it. I've been trying to experiment, but I asked it to write me an article because I write articles for this magazine, and it was nonsense, and or like it was super like distilled Wikipedia. No one wants to read it. This is like a casual fun paper. And actually last week I was fielding applications from new writers, and the ones written by ChatGPT, it is as if no one read it over, or I just don't understand how this can like get by. But yeah, so I don't think it should be used to write articles, especially personalized articles, because there's no voice. I would use it, like I use it to brainstorm now. I asked it for article ideas, and it, everything's really generic and it doesn't really give you anything new, which is a given. But it does like get the wheels turning, and it's like a friend to bounce off of when you don't really have a friend available, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Whiteboarding session, especially, I think we talked about this, like a lot of students, they do their best work at 2 a.m, and their professor's not going to be accessible at 2 a.m, nor is the writing center. So it might be best for them to have this outlet for brainstorming at 2 a.m when they are most productive.
Yeah. And then it's not like ChatGPT is giving them the idea. I still don't think, like, if you're writing an article, say the idea is not original. There's so much content out there that the idea is not original or like fully formed yet. You have to bring yourself to it. And then, yeah, ChatGPT helped you, but it is still something that only you could have come up with. So I think, yeah, that's what I.
Yeah, the human prompted, right? In some way, they were like the start of it. But for you, I would say writing is like core to who you are. And it sounds like writing is much more than just a skill for you. So how would you describe writing to you? Is it a trade? Is it a skill? Is it a craft? Is it an art? Is it a passion? Like what's your relationship with writing?
For me, I see it more as a craft because I'm more focused on like longer form, creative, persuasive writing. I think there are forms of writing that would be considered a trade, and those are the ones that could be replaced by ChatGPT, like the basic, website blurb. This is who I am about me. That could be written by ChatGPT. That's a trade. But it like in all ways, it's a skill that can be developed. And then when you're working at the craft, that's when it becomes a passion. It's not, oh, I'm passionate about writing like when I'm born. No, writing's hard and it takes time to develop the skill. And I think you have to, like we were saying, you have to get over the hump of, oh my God, I hate this. I don't know how to write, to get to the flow where you can have that passion develop. And it's just people are getting stuck before the hump now because they just use AI as soon as it gets hard, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And that's this interesting piece too. I think I have a lot of empathy for students right now because writing is hard. It's hard to have a novel idea. It's hard to express your own voice. I even feel self-conscious about my writing right now. Like as soon as I go to publish something, I'm like, oh, is this good? Is this bad? And it's really like getting started and getting over the hump until you enter flow. But if you have GPT that's able to just, you can delegate this to, what's your motivation to even try to find your state of flow? So yeah, any advice you'd give instructors that are trying to make writing a little bit more, I don't know, accessible to their students, less intimidating, more joyful, maybe just all of the above?
Yeah, I think we've got to find a way for students to see the value in writing that is outside of just, oh, this is, information structured on a paper. I think if professors and teachers can find a way to maybe like give students a ChatGPT written essay and then like give them a real human written essay that's like moving and life changing, and show them, look, this is what you can do with writing as long as you don't like settle for this. I think that's a good way to show them that writing is something that you can become passionate about. And also, I think rather than just ignoring ChatGPT and being like, writing is this, ChatGPT is not writing, show them how to like combine the two. Like maybe give them a ChatGPT written outline, or like ChatGPT ideas, or any sort of AI. I just use ChatGPT a lot. And then have them write a paper off of that and be like, oh, look, that helped you do that a lot easier. And still, this is your own work and you could be proud of this. I think options.
Yeah, yeah. And I actually love that idea you brought up first and foremost. I think there are a lot of instructors that aren't quite ready yet to bring ChatGPT in the classroom, or maybe their institutions, they're not able to. And I think the way to get around that is exactly what you just talked about, which is bring in the best paper you had submitted 5 years ago, 10 years ago, a year ago, and then have GPT write that paper when you're at home, professor, and then put both in front of your students and give them the entire class period to read both and critique both, grade both, give feedback on both. And you'll get students to see that it's worth doing it myself and not doing it on GPT, because number one, it's obvious.
Yeah.
No, I'm going to get caught, but wow, it's so much better when it's not GPT. So I love that concept, again, especially for instructors who might not even have the ability to bring GPT in the classroom, literally.
Yeah, I totally.
Great idea. You're filled with great ideas. And yeah, and I think too, there's this thing that you said earlier, which is, all right, what happens if I am a STEM teacher? I'm teaching chemistry, I'm teaching physics, and the writing that my students need to do, there's just no way to make this personal. They've got to be direct, they've got to be concise. Scientific writing is definitely a skill, because it's very different than persuasive, or I would say like kind of like passion-based writing. Me writing a blog is a lot different than me writing a lab report in analytical chemistry. So yeah, what advice would you give instructors who they don't have the benefit of being able to talk a lot about voice?
Yeah, I think like I'm trying to think of exercises, but I think one thing you could do is give someone a paper, like a scientific paper with like wrong information in it, and be like, look, try to find where all the mistakes are, like a little puzzle. I just think it's important to show that misinformation is a big problem in these like writing AI things. And I think it's hard to there's very few people who are like super passionate about writing lab reports, but I think it is important to show how, yeah, ChatGPT can help you. That's what it's for, and it's just going to become more popular, so use it, but edit it and be very careful. So then it becomes more about how to critically like assess.
Yeah, yeah. And two, the thing that I found with GPT is it just repeats itself and it's really redundant. And in scientific writing, that is a no-no. Like, you do not repeat yourself. You're not redundant. You are concise and you are to the point. And this also idea of like you're actually getting further away from the end goal if you're using GPT for this sort of writing.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that's a good exercise actually. Then give them a GPT written thing and say, cut it down, make it better, and look, and that probably took as much time as it would have taken you to write the original thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it do be like that. It's like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let me launch this poll here. And this is all about Gen AI for generated text or content and media. So do you think AI should be used to write any news articles or other forms of media? So scripts, novels, should AI be able to write this? Would you prefer to know if a form of media was written by AI? Yes, no, unsure. And then lastly, what concerns you more? That's a lie, not lastly. What concerns you more? AI replacing journalist jobs or AI spreading misinformation? And then would you subscribe to a news outlet using AI generated articles? So I actually want to ask you this in reverse order. Would you subscribe to a news article if you knew it was 100% AI generated?
I would want to read it before I subscribe. I doubt that I would enjoy it if it's 100% AI generated. I like reading, personal takes and news through someone's lens. I'm aware that it's biased and I'll read all sides of, whatever spectrum, but I just don't know if AI is interesting enough to me. I think it's a little too dry. So I
Yeah.
don't think I'm subscribed yet.
Okay, good to know. So it really depends on quality. Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you more concerned about AI replacing journalist jobs or spreading a bunch of misinformation? Maybe there's even this third category of just like creating garbage.
Yeah, so the misinformation thing is, I think we can get past that as long as we're fact checking everything and we're not just publishing AI written things without, editing. So I'm not too worried about misinformation. And like we should be teaching students again how to look at primary sources and how to fact check things. You shouldn't be like citing AI as a source. But I think so, but I also not I know I'm a little worried that, oh, AI is going to become so smart that I won't ever have to write again. But I do think as long as we stay ahead of the curve and know how to use it, this one's tough for me. I'm choosing to be optimistic in that humans do have an abstract, empathetical value that AI just doesn't have. And it just makes writing more original and interesting. Eventually, it will get too dull if we just let AI do all the writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking about it too, like people still buy paper books and Kindles, even though they can get it on an audiobook, even though the book exists in a TV show version or a movie version. People still read. You know what I mean? Like people still want a paperback book and they'll read. So I think there is something to be said about like, even if we can 100% automate this one thing, does it actually mean that it's going to not exist in some form in one way or the other? And I think to that point, we're never going to fully automate something. I mean, even like furniture making, there are still people who spend their lives handcrafting furniture and people pay a lot of money for it. You know what I mean? Like they're not just going to IKEA. So I think there's this concept of, will it ever really die? You know?
Yeah, that makes me feel a lot better actually. Yeah, there's something about reading the words that another human that I know is a human has written that just it hits different.
Yeah, it's like it's fun. Well,
Yeah.
if you have any questions for Aliana, please throw them in the Q&A feature. But I have a few other questions I wanted to ask Aliana before we wrap here, and I show you a tool you should be using in your life, and we're gonna just find my questions. Here we go. So I want to hear from you, how do you learn about new generative AI softwares or how to use generative AI or just really anything generative AI related? Because as you mentioned, things just keep changing. So how are you learning?
I'm not like I'm not being taught at that is. If I really like ChatGPT, I don't know that much, but everything that I do know has been me learning AI from AI, which is a really like overwhelming thing to do if you're not technologically inclined. But yeah, so we're not learning it in schools, at least not at my school. And I don't know the new, like what are cool new AI tools to use and which are kind of waste of time and how to use them. It just seems like a whole chunk of tech that's flying at me that I don't know how to navigate. And I would love some help from, educators, and I would love workshops or just like a nice little 10-minute thing at the start of a lecture. I'll take it. I right now, to answer your question, I'm not learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like Googling wanting to use a software for a specific reason or AI and then just feeling like overwhelmed by choice.
Yeah, there's too much for everything. There's no like one. That's why I stick to ChatGPT. Maybe there's better stuff out there, but I don't really want to go swimming in the web. I I I'm still a college student. I'd like to be taught. I'd like to be navigated.
Yeah, kind of don't know where to start. Yeah. And I think too, like it is so overwhelming. Even for these webinars, I'll search for podcasts, like what are some podcast recommendations? And it's like there are so many podcasts right now about AI where you're like, what's actually like a good podcast? What's applicable to me? So it's almost hard without community. I don't know what the solution is per se. For me, it's been community to understand, like, I'm going to just follow other people I know who are like they're dedicating their lives to this. Like Ethan Malik, you might have heard of him. He's a professor at MIT. And I'm like, I'm just going to follow what he's doing, like, because he has good ideas. But yeah, I would say you spoke to this a little bit earlier, but what sort of transparency do you think that you owe instructors with how you're using generative AI, and what transparency do you think they owe you if they're using AI?
I think professors, if they're giving us material that has been written by AI, then let us know, like put that in the material. But if it's, just brainstorming ideas, like I said earlier, that's, I don't really care. But for me, I personally, this is where it's tough because we're not really talking about it in schools. We're just told, don't use it. It's bad. There is no like line in the sand. Everyone has to come up with their own line of what is ethical, what is not. For me, it's if I didn't write it, it's not mine and I won't submit it. But I have friends who say, oh, well, it was my idea that I put into ChatGPT. And so technically it's my work. And it's like, is it? It's so tough. And so for me, I think if I wrote all the words and I'm submitting this thing, then I can consider that my work, even if I brainstormed with ChatGPT. I don't really feel the need then to tell a professor, hey, ChatGPT helped me brainstorm ideas, because it's like it was a friend,
Yeah.
I don't know, but if professors want to set rules, we have to talk about it then.
Yeah. And I think to your point too, the great thing about GPT is if you do have, let's say, a brainstorming session with GPT, which we're talking about it like it's a person, like my friend George, and you do brainstorming, and then you end up using a few ideas, but then you write your own paper, you spend hours on it, it's your voice, it's your words. If your instructor says, hey, use GPT, just send me the link to the chat you had so that I could look at your final product with the link to the chat. Like that to me seems like something that you'd be really down to do, because you're really only using GPT as a brainstorm, but it's hard if you're not being told how to proceed forward. You probably feel a little bit like, am I in trouble? Am I not in trouble? I don't know. These are my words, but GPT was part of the process. What do I do here? So it's a little bit of like ambiguity is not great for you, right?
That's actually a really good idea to send, like, for professors to ask for the GPT chat link. Yeah, because right now I'm like totally, I feel like kind of sneaky like even opening the GPT tab, which is like, because professors put on their syllabus, at least this is what I've experienced. All my past syllabi from the past quarter or two have said, use of ChatGPT is not allowed in this class. Like this is considered plagiarism. But that's so vague. What do you mean use? Can I like ask it about a topic from this class, or is it I can't copy like straight from it? Like we have to talk about it. We can't just ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I saw a syllabus that was like, there will be no AI use in this class at all. And I was like, well, what if your student Ubers to class? Uber's using AI.
Yeah.
So kind of to say that there's no AI period is a little short-sighted, because like algorithms rule the world. Now to say that you can't generate content with AI and pass it off as your own, that seems reasonable. And I would be okay with that. But again, I think to your point, like we need to shed a light on what's right, what's wrong. And it's okay if it varies by class to class, because I'd imagine it discipline by discipline, it's going to be different. But yeah, it sounds like there's one thing you want, it's just clarity.
Clarity and transparency. I honestly think that if professors just were more detailed in what they were banning, I really think people would listen. It's just when you go a hard and fast, not at all, then people are like, they're being unrealistic. I'm just going to use it however I want to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we'll see. You start classes soon, so we'll see if your syllabus look any different than syllabi look any different than last time.
Yeah.
Spring term. I know you're hoping. Last question I want to ask you before I demo a tool live here is, with AI changing so much and evolving so much, there's a lot of, I think, like ethical concerns right now, data security, the actual content of AI, how AI is evaluating. So yeah, do you have any concerns right now about AI ethics and how it's being used more broadly? And I know this is a really vague, broad question, but I don't know if you have any real AI ethics concerns.
I have been trying to think about this. I mean, I know data security is what everyone's worried about, and I don't want to say I don't really care. I mean, I don't use social media and stuff. My Instagram got hacked like a year and a half ago, and I just haven't touched it since. So I think if they're using my information, I don't care. But I think if it's about, you know, they're giving biased accounts to, like, the main thing actually, now that I'm thinking about it a little, is I think if all we're inputting into AI is the same perspective, like a Western white male researcher perspective, then I think we're just drifting towards a problem. It's not like a problem right now, but it's going to become a problem when everyone is using AI. We have to find a way to put in, I don't really know how it works, but input like a more global source and a more balanced take, which is so hard because everyone has different biases and stuff. Like, this is an impossible question, but yeah, there's got to be a way to make it more diverse, like balanced resource, because there is a huge risk. Obviously, most of the content that exists is like research papers from the past forever have been done by like white men, which
women were not allowed to go to college up until fairly recently in the grand scheme of the written word. So
although I don't know how you avoid then having it be unbalanced if most of the content is made by white men, because like it's good content, a lot of it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is I think this is where I'm most nervous is absolutely. I think there's this thing that, you love writing. Maybe you are fine with your writing being used to train machine learning models. I know I'm personally fine with my writing being used to train machine learning models, because I post publicly on the internet all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I was a Facebook child, but there is this thing about, if I'm using AI to generate content and I'm not really mindful of the implicit bias of these generators, because it's trained on human data that's inherently just going to be prone to bias, prone to inaccuracy. So I think it's going to be a weird fine line we're going to be finding ourselves balancing. But yeah, that I would say that we shared that same concern.
Yeah, I'm not worried about what it's taking from me. I'm just worried about what it's giving me. Yeah, I don't, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining today. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And then, before I run this tool demo, because I'm going to show everyone a tool they should be using, do you have any kind of final, I would say, thoughts for the educators in the audience today? Any sort of words of encouragement or just perspective from a student who I would say you are in school to learn?
Yeah.
You have a thirst for knowledge.
I mean, I think if you're going to pay this much for an American college education, you kind of have to care about it. But like, all I really can say is, like, I think it's amazing that professors are coming to these things and they actually care about moving with the times rather than ignoring it. So great job, everyone. I really appreciate it. These are the professors that we need. So thank you. And thank you for having me. This was great.
It's great having you every time. Yeah. And I think too, what I've learned from you too, is that there's you're going to run into students who use this for nefarious reasons. You're going to run into students who want to ignore GPT because it's something new to learn and they're already overwhelmed. But I would say you represent the large majority of voices, which is, I want to learn how to use it. And I want to learn how to use it from professional educators, not from TikTok.
Yeah. Yes. You nailed it.
I don't know. Are you even on TikTok? I don't know.
No, I see. This is why I'm tech averse. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on Twitter. Twitter really makes me scared. I'm not on Facebook. All I'm on is, like, I just made a LinkedIn profile. That's it.
So I found you. That's how I found you. Well, thank you so much, Aliana. And we'll wrap today's session. I'll show everyone this generative AI tool, because I love if everybody leaves with one new tool in their tool belt, which, by the way, if you haven't used Claude yet, use Claude. But this is called Gamma, and I'm going to walk you through this video, and I'm going to make sure it's at 1.5 speed. So what Gamma will do is generate content for you, and I'm going to show you how it is used to generate presentations. Now, I've used Gamma to generate presentations before, not for today, but before, and it generates something that can be edited. So I'm going to walk you through the flow. I haven't experimented with creating a document or a web page. I've only done presentations, but you type in what you want to create a presentation about. For me, it was authentic assessment. And then it comes up with basically chapters for your presentation. What I did was added an additional chapter on using GPT to create authentic assessments. And then you continue, and I spent way too much time coming up with a theme. I wanted to do something that felt robotic because I was talking about GPT, and I ended up finding something that I felt like properly was robotic enough. And what it does is it generates a presentation on that outline that it's basically built for you and you can edit. And what you can do is then go back through this presentation, through this deck, and edit whatever text you'd like, move around imaging. At that point, it's just kind of like using Google Slides or PowerPoint. So I would highly recommend to my educators, professionals in the chat who are constantly having to create documents like this to use generative AI every once in a while. Of course, edit. To Aliana's point, edit what you're putting in front of your students because they can sniff out GPT just like educators can sniff out GPT. But hopefully you find this as a helpful tool that you can play around with. Gamma, highly recommend it. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to skip ahead here because I already showed this. To every educator coming, yes, for some other resources that has been recommended by the PACBAC community. First and foremost, ChatGPT for Teachers. It's a Facebook group I joined last week. It's how I found Gamma. It's how I found a bunch of other things. It's a really great community if you are also maybe just looking for like community, but you want to learn, you want to ask questions. PACBAC got a nod, so I'm really proud of that in that Facebook group. The Bot Brothers, AI for Educators, is a podcast that was recommended in that Facebook group. And I think it's still pretty new in the grand scheme of things, but was recommended, and you can probably find that on anywhere you can find podcasts. And then lastly, I want to give a shout out to a founder who I happen to have connected with before, has a history in ed tech, AI for Education. They have a webinar series much like this one. So if you are just looking for more webinars, more videos, kind of documented videos, there's a webinar series if you just Google AI for Education. So want to again thank everyone for coming today. Poll results will be shared in this deck within the next 2 days, so you'll be able to see the poll results. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for asking questions in the Q&A. Thank you for engaging in the chat. Thank you for being a warm audience for our very first student voice and student guests here. And I hope you learned something today, had one thing to take away with, and I will hopefully see you a month from now when we do Roundup number 4. So have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the globe, and have a wonderful week. Bye, everyone.